The night after Calder's wedding, we gathered around a long oak table in Bend, still half drunk on champagne and triumph. Sun River had delivered everything my mother wanted: mountain peaks glowing at sunset, a string quartet on the lawn, photos arranged like advertisements for a family untouched by cracks. She lifted her glass, eyes bright as polished silver. Your brother's wedding was perfect. The words floated like a benediction, then settled on me like ash. Around her, the others laughed, replaying details of the reception, the way Calder twirled his bride during the first dance, the toast that drew tears on cue. I smiled politely and passed the breadbasket, the practiced daughter who never asked for more. My cousin leaned across the table, grinned sharp. "So, Alawan, when will it be your turn, or are you planning to surprise us?" The table rippled with amusement. Even my father allowed a thin smile, as though the joke were harmless. I let my gaze drop to my hands, twisting the napkin between my fingers. My ring glinted briefly under the chandelier, a quiet betrayal of the story they'd written for me. I curled my hand into my lap, letting the light disappear. My mother pressed on, her voice a mixture of teasing and instruction. "Don't wait too long, dear. You're not getting younger." The laughter swelled again, careless and familiar. I lifted my glass and sipped the wine slowly, letting the burn steady me. My smile held, but beneath it a truth waited, patient as a fuse. They had no idea the story had already turned, no idea that the joke was theirs to keep. And as the table settled back into chatter, I breathed in once, preparing for what I would say next. The laughter around the table thickened, a chorus of voices turning my silence into invitation. Calder's best man leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Careful, Elowen. If you wait too long, you'll be, what do they call it?" He snapped his fingers. "Used material." The table broke into snickers. My mother shook her head as though embarrassed for him, but she didn't correct him. Instead, she smiled tightly, as if the cruelty were only truth said aloud. I kept my glass steady, swirling the Pinot until it caught the light. Heat crawled up my neck, but I didn't let it bloom into color. I had learned long ago that my silence was their favorite stage. So I smiled. "It already happened," I said, voice even, almost casual. I let the words drop between us like silverware on porcelain. "You just weren't there." The laughter stopped. Forks hovered. Glasses froze midway to lips. My cousin's grin faltered, confusion slipping into his eyes. My mother blinked, once, then again, as though she'd misheard. What she asked softly. I set my glass down. "I'm married." The room tightened. Calder's wife shifted uneasily, caught in the crossfire of a revelation she hadn't anticipated. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. When my mother pressed, her voice sharp now, stripped of pleasantries. "6 months ago," I answered. "Courthouse. Simple. No drama." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Calder's gaze darted from me to our parents, his expression a blend of disbelief and irritation, as though I'd broken a script he'd worked hard to memorize. I leaned back, folding my napkin across my lap. The picture of composure. They had always mistaken my silence for weakness. Tonight, they would learn it had only been restraint. And as the weight of my words settled into the room, their questions began to rise all at once, sharp and frantic, demanding an explanation I had no intention of offering. Their voices blurred as questions fired across the table. But in my mind, another night unfolded a quiet evening in Portland when I first realized I had been written out. It was late spring, the city warming after months of rain. Every day I checked the mailbox outside my apartment in Laurelhurst, half expecting the heavy envelope with embossed letters. Calder's wedding was all my mother could talk about on our sporadic calls. Surely, she wouldn't forget me. Surely, they wouldn't. But the box stayed empty. Bills, flyers. Nothing else. When I finally asked, my mother's voice was light, dismissive. "We assumed you'd be busy with work. Dear, those school schedules of yours are impossible." Calder followed with his own line. "We thought it might be complicated. You bringing someone." Each excuse landed like a polished stone, smooth, practiced, impossible to grip. On the morning of the wedding, I stayed in bed longer than usual, my body heavy with something I didn't want to name. By afternoon, my phone vibrated nonstop. Photos flooded my feeds. Calder and his bride framed by the Deschutes River, her gown catching the golden light, my parents beaming like they had been handed crowns. There was a group shot my cousins, my aunts, everyone in coordinated shades of cream and sage. The caption read, "Family, forever." I stared until the edges of the screen blurred. I didn't cry. Not then. I scrolled, face hot, heart pounding, waiting for proof it was a mistake, that my name had somehow slipped from the list by accident, but the proof never came. Instead, silence did. No call to explain, no apology. Just the neatness of a story told without me. That night, I closed my phone and sat by the window, Portland's streetlights glowing in rows. It struck me then being left out wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing I had never been counted in. And months later, when I said the words across that table, the truth was already practiced, carved deep in the silence of that missing envelope. 6 months before Calder's celebration, I stood inside the Multnomah County Courthouse on Southwest 4th Avenue, hand in hand with Asher. The marble floors echoed faintly under our steps. Our reflections stretched in the tall glass doors. A clerk double-checked our paperwork. The judge asked if we were ready, and that was all it took. 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, a vow spoken with steady voices, no rehearsed speeches, no assigned seating, no one taking pictures on our behalf. Afterward, we walked out into the gray Portland afternoon, the city busy with its own errands. Asher carried a small bouquet of calla lilies wrapped in butcher paper, the flowers I loved most. We crossed the street toward Tom McCall Waterfront Park, where the river cut a silver line between bridges. The breeze off the Willamette lifted my veil, simple, borrowed from a friend, and I laughed as Asher caught it before it flew. We stopped on a rise overlooking the water, the steel arches of the Hawthorne Bridge behind us. There, without ceremony, we read words we had written on scraps of paper, promises shaped by honesty, not performance. My hands shook, but not from fear. They shook because I had finally stepped into something entirely my own. Asher slid the ring onto my finger, a thin band of gold we'd chosen together at a shop off Hawthorne Boulevard. No one clapped, no one cried. Only the river bore witness. And that was enough. Later that evening, he dug into the soil near our small rental by Mount Tabor and planted lily bulbs, saying, "Now your name grows here." I mailed a photo to my parents the next day, me mid-spin, hair flying, Asher's arm around my waist. I was laughing in a way they hadn't seen in years. I waited for a call, a note, any acknowledgement that they had received it. None came. The silence was louder than rejection. It told me they had decided my joy wasn't part of the story they wanted to tell. And by the time Calder's wedding unfolded, I already knew how little space I held in the family album. The silence that followed my wedding photo wasn't new. It was only the most recent echo in a long corridor of omissions. Growing up, Calder's trophies lived on the mantel above the fireplace, gleaming cups from baseball tournaments, plaques from debate, even a ribbon from a science fair where he'd only placed second. My drawings, framed in cheap glass, spent years stacked in the hall closet. When neighbors visited, my mother always ushered them toward Calder's collection, her voice bright with pride. If someone asked about me, she'd say lightly, "Allowan's our quiet one. She's helpful. Every December, she wrote her holiday letters on heavy cream paper. I can still see her at the dining table, pen in hand, recounting Calder's promotions, his college internships, his engagement. When it came to me, she tucked in a single line, always vague. Elowen keeps busy with her projects. Never a mention of the mural I painted at the community center, or the grant I won to fund art programs at the middle school. My name filled space like punctuation necessary, but hardly noticed. At first, I thought invisibility was safety. If I didn't demand too much, I couldn't disappoint them. If I stayed reliable, I'd be left in peace. But invisibility calcifies. It becomes its own cage, locking you out of the narrative until you start to wonder if you were ever really part of it. By the time Calder's wedding arrived, I recognized the pattern. I wasn't simply forgotten. I was edited out. Not maliciously, perhaps, but strategically erasure disguised as harmony. My mother preferred the clean lines of a story that matched her expectations, a son who succeeded, a daughter who didn't complicate things. And yet, each time she pressed delete, I felt it. When she left my achievements out of those letters, when she introduced Calder's wife with tears in her eyes but brushed past the man I loved as though he were temporary, when she scrolled through my photo at the courthouse and chose silence over acknowledgement, those cuts bled together, slow and steady, until the night in Bend when I finally let the truth slip free. The fuse wasn't lit by one cruel joke or a single taunt. It had been burning for years, every omission another spark carried forward. So when I told them I was married, it wasn't a bomb. It was a boundary. And for once, I wasn't going to retreat after dropping it. At Fuller's coffee shop 2 days later, my father asked to meet me alone. 2 mornings after the dinner in Bend, I opened my inbox to a message from my father. Just 5 words. Can we talk? Just us. I almost deleted it. For years. His quiet had been the mortar holding my mother's control in place, but curiosity tugged me toward yes. And so I found myself at Fuller's coffee shop, tucked into a red vinyl booth that smelled faintly of bacon grease and burnt espresso. He was already there. Coffee half full, hands folded like he was preparing for confession. His eyes lifted when I sat down, softer than I remembered. I kept the photo, he said without preamble, for a moment. I didn't know what he meant. Then I saw the corner of an envelope peeking from his coat pocket, the courthouse photo I had mailed months ago, the one my mother never acknowledged. He slid it across the table. The edges were worn, creased from being unfolded more than once. Your mother said it was disrespectful. He continued, but I couldn't throw it away. I stared at the image, at my own laughter caught mid-motion. Asher's arm steady around me. My throat tightened. Why I asked. He sipped his coffee, eyes lowered, because it looked real, and because I wanted to keep one thing that was yours. The words sounded fragile, as though they might break if I questioned them too much. Silence hung between us until he finally asked, "Is he good to you?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "Better than being invisible." His lips pressed together, as if the answer was both relief and rebuke. He nodded slowly, but there was no promise in it, no vow that he would stop hiding behind silence. Just recognition, late and incomplete. I folded the photo carefully, tucking it back into its envelope. Keeping it doesn't erase the rest. I told him. He didn't argue. He only looked at me with an expression that hovered somewhere between apology and surrender. 2 days later, the wedding album arrived on my doorstep. The package arrived on a gray Portland afternoon, the kind where the rain doesn't fall so much as linger in the air. A thick, cream-colored envelope leaned against my apartment door, my family's crest embossed in gold at the corner. No return address, no note. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and slid it open with a knife. Inside was the album Calder's Wedding, preserved in glossy pages and scripted captions. At first, it was predictable: the rehearsal dinner at Sun River, the lakeside ceremony framed by mountains. My mother mid-toast with eyes wet and voice trembling. Then I turned a page and froze. The family portrait, everyone arranged in careful rows, smiling as if a magazine spread. Beneath the photo, each name neatly printed in calligraphy. And there, between Calder and my parents, was a dark-haired woman in a dress I recognized. Not mine, but close. A cousin from Vermont who shared my height, my coloring. The caption under her image read, "Elowen Pike." My stomach dropped. They hadn't just left me out. They had written me back in, using someone else's body. Asher walked in from the living room, drying his hands on a towel. He saw the page over my shoulder, and his jaw tightened. "They replaced you," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, softer, "That means they knew you mattered." The words should have comforted me, but they scraped raw. If I mattered, why erase me at all? Why dress up a substitution and call it truth? I closed the album slowly, pressing the pages together as though the images might spill out if I wasn't careful. The envelope still sat on the counter, its gold crest glinting under the kitchen light. I picked up a marker from the drawer, uncapped it, and stared at the blank front of the package. The next morning, I carried it back outside. The word I had written bold across its face. The word looked stark against the cream envelope, black ink slicing through the gold crest like a verdict. Return. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology to soften it. Just the truth they had tried to edit out, scrawled across their careful packaging. The next morning, I carried it down the block to the blue mailbox on the corner. The metal was cold beneath my fingers as I lifted the handle and let the envelope slide into darkness. The clang it made when it dropped was sharper than I expected, final in a way words never were. By evening, my inbox lit up. My mother's email subject line read, "You blindsided us." Her words were clipped, rehearsed. She accused me of cruelty, insisted Calder's wife was heartbroken, claimed there had been no need for a scene at dinner. I read the lines twice, searching for even a fragment of curiosity about why I'd stayed silent for so long. There was none. 2 hours later, Calder posted a photo on social media himself and his bride at Sun River. Glasses raised, the caption "Real love shows up." The comments stacked quickly, friends affirming, relatives applauding. I didn't bother to respond. It wasn't written for me anyway. Instead, I opened a notebook and began to plan something of my own. Not another wedding, not a redo, but a gathering that couldn't be edited or staged. I chose the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden in southeast Portland, where wooden bridges cross still ponds and blossoms spill into every corner, a place where presence mattered more than performance. 30 names filled the page. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, people who had shown up without being asked, people who saw me without revisions. Asher leaned over my shoulder, reading the list. "This feels right," he said, and for the first time in months, I felt light enough to believe him. The evening of our gathering, the garden felt alive with more than flowers. Lanterns hung low across the wooden bridge, casting reflections on the pond, and voices mingled with the sound of water slipping over rocks. 30 chairs stood in a loose circle, no head table, no stage. People came carrying pies, jars of lemonade, bouquets clipped from their own yards. Friends from work, a few neighbors, even 2 of my former students each face a reminder that belonging wasn't something I had to audition for. Asher squeezed my hand before we began. We stood together at the center of the circle, not to perform, but to speak what had once been kept private. We read our vows again, the same ones we had whispered at the courthouse, this time aloud, steady, unashamed. I heard my voice crack once, not from nerves, but from the weight finally lifting. When I looked around, no one was measuring my worth against Calder's ceremony. No one was tallying costs or critiquing dresses. They were simply there, eyes open, listening. At the edge of the circle, near the stone steps, I caught sight of my father. He hadn't announced he was coming. He didn't approach, didn't interrupt. He stood back, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable but intent. When our vows ended and the small group broke into gentle applause, he lingered, and when I passed near him, he whispered, "I'm trying to learn how to show up." I didn't answer. Words would have made it smaller than it was. As the night stretched on, we lit candles and set them floating across the pond. Their reflections shimmered together, unarranged, uncorrected, beautiful in their unevenness. The next morning, I found a message from my mother waiting in my inbox. Weeks passed before my mother reached out. The subject line was bare. "Ready to talk when you are..." No apology, no acknowledgement of what had been done, only a door cracked open on her terms. I replied with mine. If we were to speak, it would be without revisions. No more invented invitations, no more names swapped in captions. My life would not be reshaped to fit her version of family. She didn't answer right away. My father did. "A short note, I hear you. I'll honor it." It was the closest he had ever come to a promise. Calder, meanwhile, fired off a clipped message about loyalty and embarrassment, his words sharp but hollow. For once, I let them pass without reply. Silence, this time, was mine to wield. One evening, Asher and I walked the East Bank Esplanade, the city skyline glowing across the Willamette. Cyclists drifted by, joggers passed in rhythm, and the river carried all of it steadily north. I slipped a hand into my coat pocket and felt the edge of the courthouse photo, folded but intact. I pulled it out and looked at our frozen laughter. The blur of my dress caught mid-turn. For months, it had been proof of love, of defiance, of a life that didn't need their permission. Now it was something else, not evidence, but reminder. I tucked it back into my pocket and leaned against the railing, the reflection of the bridges shimmering across the water. For the first time in years, the story in front of me was mine alone, no revisions waiting, no audience to please. And as the river moved beneath us, I felt the weight of family lighten into something I could finally choose.